So thank you all for coming to the St. Genevieve Museum Learning Center Speaker Series. We've been doing this now for a couple of years now, I think. It's been a while. So thanks to Dick Reminger and the Orris Theater for allowing us to use this facility. Thank you. Raise your hand if you're a member of our museum. So just about everybody. Yeah, that's great. Our museum, of course, as you well know, is supported by admissions, memberships, a few grants here and there, gift shop sales, and of course sponsorships. We were fortunate tonight that our speaker presentation is sponsored by Steve Winkler and Architecture. Where did he go? There he is, in Architectural Ironworks. Stand and take a bow.
Stanley.
Stanley. Where did I get that? Where did I get Steve? I'm sorry. Stanley. You'll answer to anything. We know that.
Hey, you're not calling me Stanley now, are you?
This is Stanley also. Everyone's Stanley tonight. Before we get into our program, I'd like to tell you about just a few upcoming events that we've got. March 28th, we have another Show Me Dino Lab from 11 to 4 with Mike Fix over there. If you've never come in and talked about what it's like to be at a dig site or be a paleontologist, maybe you got a grandkid or something that's interested, he's the guy to talk to. So be sure and stop by anytime and talk to him. He'll answer all your questions. The mouse races, they're coming up on April 25th right here at the Orris. How many of you been to mouse races of any kind? Not that many of you. Oh, you need to try it. It's really fun. And we're talking real mice, real races, and it's held right here. You can even name your own mouse, and it really is a lot of fun. So give it a try. Coming up on the 25th, we've got a few flyers around. You can purchase tickets from the flyer there as well, QR code. Let's see, if you know of homeschool students who haven't taken advantage of our many homeschool programs, please reach out. Just call 883-DINO. Perfect phone number, don't you think? We're also working on some new displays, so if you haven't stopped by the museum lately, please do so. I think you'll find a few new things to look at. Our next speaker series will be held on April 29th. Lori Fallert will be speaking on the city of Bloomsdale. She wrote a book on that subject, and it'll be a fun night, as they always are, as everyone brings their own stories and memories of the town that they hold so dear, and that will be Bloomsdale on the 29th. So now for tonight's presentation. The American Revolution has always been of great interest to me, and I'm pleased to welcome Steve Bailey from Project Appleseed, a nationwide nonprofit program that teaches fundamental marksmanship combined with stories of the American Revolution. He's been presenting these programs for some time, traveling all around our area here and teaching people about one of the most pivotal days in American history. And again, we thank Stanley Winkler for sponsoring this program, and we'll turn things over to Steve Bailey.
He said he wrote a bad check for you.
He wrote a bad check. Do you want to use this?
Well, let's see what. Can you guys hear me okay if I just use my outside voice? Are we saying no back here? Can't hear me? All right.
Want to use it or not?
Yeah, they can't. Well, they can't hear me.
Just click that anyway.
I'm not used to using a microphone. How's this? That better?
Put that wherever.
Put that in my other pocket.
In your other pocket.
Got my pockets full.
He's got mics all over.
Pardon? Does that have a mute button? You may want one before this is all over with. Okay. As she said, I'm with Project Appleseed. I've been doing this for a little while. This program, this story you're going to hear, 3 strikes of a match. We refer to it like this because kind of like getting a fire going on a windy day. It took a little while to get things started on this first day of the Revolutionary War. It's April 19th, 1775. Some people say that April 19th is America's birthday, and I know that we think about July 4th as being America's birthday. This started more than a year prior to the signing of the Declaration of Independence. And the events of this day is what made the Declaration of Independence necessary, maybe inevitable is another way to put it. So I'm going to start this off in Lexington, a little town about 12 miles west of Boston. And a couple guys came riding into town shortly after midnight, Paul Revere and William Dawes. And the story of Paul Revere is pretty familiar to all of us. we know all about his midnight ride. That's part of our national mythology. Well, William Dawes had the same mission that Paul Revere had that night. And their mission was to get to Lexington and warn John Hancock and Sam Adams that there was a raid coming on Concord. And the royal governor of Massachusetts was sending 800 of his best troops to Concord to confiscate militia supplies. Their route was going to take them through Lexington. So Revere, this was Revere's fourth ride, actually, through the Massachusetts countryside. His first three he spent talking to people along the road, militia types, influential people in town, and he set up what amounted to a communication system. They knew that this raid was going to happen. Paul Revere and Dawes both belonged to a resistance organization called the Sons of Liberty, and they had Sons of Liberty was very good about gathering information. So they knew what the royal governor was going to do. They just didn't know when. So Revere set up a system of riders and signals like church bells ringing in the middle of the night, bonfires, the lanterns in the North Church. We all know about that, right? One if by land and two if by sea. Well, that was signals to riders on the Charlestown Peninsula that this raid was going to happen. So these guys get into town. They did warn the countryside all along their route. They took different routes. Revere took a northerly route. Dawes took a southerly route. They got into town just after midnight, maybe 15, 20 minutes apart. And then they found Adams and Hancock and told them what was going on. You know, you guys have to get out of town. You're subject to arrest for sedition, and they will hang you if they catch you. Somebody got the bell going. Riders fanned out through the countryside. The militia started forming on the green. The militia started forming up in here. And took a while for everybody to get into town. When they were all there, there was something between 70 and 80 men there. The number I've seen used most is 77, and I may refer back to that. It's just kind of automatic to refer to 77. And if you could put yourself there that night, and you'd look around, you'd see your friends, your neighbors, father, brother, cousin, uncle. Small town, everybody was related to everybody else. Everybody, we're all from St. Genevieve, Perryville, wherever. We kind of know what that's like. I find it remarkable that out of those 77 men standing there were only 12 last names. They ranged in age from 16 to 66. There were two 16-year-old boys there. There were 8 pairs of fathers and sons standing on the green that night. The company commander showed up about 2 o'clock in the morning. His name was Jonathan Parker. He was an old soldier. He'd served with distinction in the French and Indian War. He served for a period of time with Robert Rogers. He was present at the siege of Louisburg, the final climactic battle on the plains of Abraham with General Wolfe. Captain Parker knew well the business of soldiering, and he was also terminally ill. He was in advanced stages of tuberculosis. He got out of bed and walked 2 miles into town when the alarm rider came through. Now, his men had elected him to lead them. And I find that remarkable too. They knew he was dying, but they wanted him to lead them because he was an experienced soldier, and he agreed to do it. So he gets into town, and they have a little town meeting right there on the green. And very sober, very, very, very serious affair. The troops pledged their lives to him. They promised to follow his orders unto the death. And he promised that he wouldn't get them killed unnecessarily. He communicated orders to them. Now, they knew that this raid was coming. He had orders from the provincial legislature, which was an illegal body under current British law. And his orders, they were pretty simple. We're going to muster on the green in a parade formation. We're going to face this road. That's, the regulars were Concord's up here. Boston is down here. They're going to march along this road, and the militia is just going to stand in a parade formation and demonstrate resolve. We know what you're doing, and if you don't stop it, we are prepared to fight. They were ordered not to block the road, not impede progress in any way, and above all, not to fire unless fired upon. Pretty simple stuff, right? So Captain Parker they'd had false alarms before, so he wanted to have a little clearer picture of what was going on. He sent out a couple of riders, scouts on horseback. And he dismissed his troops. They were standing around in the dark and the cold. He didn't want that. So he dismissed his troops. He told them, you know, if you live in town, you go home. If you live out of town, just find someplace where you can get out on a cold. Stay within sound of the drum. You'll be needed at a moment's notice. And most of them went to Buckman's Tavern, which is down, where is Buckman's Tavern? It's down here someplace. And they just waited. They didn't have to wait very long until the first rider came back. And he reported he hadn't seen anything. Roads were clear. There's no regulars on the road. And so they had to wait a little while longer. It was almost dawn when the second rider came in, and he was all worked up. There are regulars all over the road. There's 800 of them. They're just right outside of town. They're going to be here any minute. You have to act fast. So Captain Parker gets his drummer to sound the assembly call on the drums, just one long roll on the drum. And the men come flying out of wherever they were, and they formed up on the green. They're kind of jostling for position, you know, make sure the powder horn is right. And they're surprised when an officer on a horse leads the lead 5 companies off of the Concord Road and right into town. There's about 200 regulars marched into town and formed up right in front of them. This picture is actually on the Lexington Green. It was taken during a reenactment. They have a reenactment in Lexington every year on or near April 19th. And I'm going to go, this is pretty close to what it looked like as far as the numbers go, the distance apart, all that kind of stuff. Now these regulars marched in, and they quickly deployed into a firing line. And these guys, they were cranky. They'd been gotten out of bed in the middle of the night, rode across the bay, dumped off in a swamp, water up to their middles. They didn't have any food. They'd been told to leave their knapsacks at home, only bring 36 rounds of ammunition, and away they went. It's 12 miles from Boston to Concord. They marched, they're soaking wet when they get there. When this officer leads them onto this green, they had their bayonets fixed. They're like I said, they're cranky. They're yelling, they're flourishing these bayonets, they're threatening. And there's an officer, British officer, comes between these two lines, and he comes up to approaches Captain Parker's troops. Now, Parker's troops weren't expecting this. They were expecting them just to walk past. And they're getting a little hinky. They're moving around in the lines. Captain Parker starts barking orders. Stand your ground. If you run, I'll shoot you myself. Don't fire unless they fire first. He pulls his sword and he said, if they want a war, then let it begin here. This officer approaches them and he's yelling. A lot of yelling going on. There's spectators around. They're yelling. This officer says, ye villains, ye rebels, lay down your arms and disperse. Now, this was a deal that Captain Parker was willing to take. He's got 77 farmers here. They got 200 trained regulars. There's another 600 on the road right out there. This is no place to fight. Gives the order to disperse. His men start to leave the green. They turn around, they're walking away, and at that moment, somebody fired a shot. Nobody knows who fired it to this day, but a shot was fired. And at the sound of that shot, the regulars gave 2 volleys into the backs of the retreating militia, and then they charged bayonets. Quarter mile or so down the road, the British commander, do we have Lieutenant Colonel Smith here? British commander, Lieutenant Colonel Francis Smith. You're going to hear a lot about Lieutenant Colonel Smith. Lieutenant Colonel Smith hears firing, and he's puzzled by this. He'd given his lead elements clear orders. Go to Concord. secure the town, we'll be right behind you. Those were the orders. And he doesn't understand why he's hearing volleys coming from over here. Concord is in this direction. So he gets into town, gets forward as quickly as he could, and he finds total chaos. His troops are running all over town. They're shooting at people. They're stabbing at people with bayonets. They're breaking into homes. They're starting to loot. And he's, what is going on here? He grabs a drummer and has the drummer beat the assembly call, and the troops fall in. They didn't want to. They were having a lot of fun, and they did not want it stopped. So they're really kind of surly about this. And he can tell. You can tell when somebody's doing, when they're not happy with you. He wanted the shooting to stop. Lieutenant Colonel Smith wanted the shooting to stop. So he has his troops lined up. He wanted them to unload their muskets. How do we unload a musket?
Fire it.
We shoot it. We practiced this the other day. He has his men gives 3 cheers to the king. Huzzah! 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 And then they fired what's known as a fire of joy. It's a volley that starts at one end of the line and ripples to the other end of the line. Then he marched his troops out of town. They left behind 8 dead and 9 wounded. And the population was just absolutely horrified. Think about it. Think about it. Think about, witnessing something like this. The question that hangs out here right now is, how do we get to this place? How do we get to this place where we're shooting at each other and we're stabbing at each other with bayonets? And the short answer is taxation without representation. If you want a long answer, read the Declaration of Independence. It has a long list of 27, I think it is, injuries and usurpations. But this will do. The British government, central government in London, had been taxing the colonists for some years to pay down French and Indian War debts. And the colonists felt that it was against the law to tax them since they did not have parliamentary representation. And they were trying. Benjamin Franklin made several trips to England to try to get parliamentary representation for the colonies. The Parliament wouldn't hear it. The House of Lords was not about to dilute their power to letting these mere colonists have any representation. There was a letter that was sent back that said, we have the power to tax you in all cases whatsoever. So pay up, Buttercup. Colonists started protesting these taxes. And these protests from time to time got pretty violent. There were beatings, there were murders, there was arson, there was intimidation. All these things were going on. And these protests culminated in the greatest tax protest in history. Anybody know what this is? The Boston Tea Party. We all know that story. It's part of our national mythology. The colonists dressed up like Mohawks and boarded these ships. And, I learned that this dressing like Indians was for purposes of disguise. I've come to the conclusion that that's not what it was. It was political theater. America was represented in drawings of the time as an Indian, typically an Indian woman. And the American Indian was known as the freest person on earth. So this political theater was free men threw your tea into the ocean, free Americans threw your tea into the ocean. And the point was not lost on Parliament or the king. They passed a series of laws, Parliament passed a series of laws, and the king assented to them. These laws were called the Coercive Acts in England. They were known as the Intolerable Acts in the colonies. And the Coercive Acts were aimed at all the colonies, but in particular Massachusetts. This was ground center. Massachusetts was declared to be a colony in rebellion. The government was dissolved. Boston was blockaded by land and by sea, occupied by about 4,000 troops under the command of Lieutenant General Thomas Gage. And if that wasn't enough, General Gage was appointed royal governor and empowered to use martial law. Now, this picture of General Gage, he was already the most powerful person in North America. He was commander of His Majesty's forces in all of North America. But with this new position, Thomas Gage became, in point of fact, a military dictator. He had orders. His orders were to put down the rebellion, disarm the population, and arrest the ringleaders. He's a soldier, so soldiers follow orders. And General Gage pretty quickly got to the disarmament part. He decided that the best way to do this, the most efficient way to disarm the colonists, is to get control of the gunpowder. Muskets and the cannon it used at the time wouldn't function without black powder. It wasn't manufactured in the colonies. It was all imported, and it was stored outside of town in communal magazines called powder houses. General Gage started sending troops on what was called at the time powder raids. He did 3. The first one was on this powder house. It's in Somerville, Massachusetts. Sent a couple hundred troops. They hit it on a Sunday morning, got in, grabbed the goodies, got out, easy peasy, nobody got hurt, and they got a big portion of the powder, local powder. This just enraged the colonists. They paid for this. This is theirs. They paid for it. This didn't belong to the king. Gage attempted 2 more powder raids, and they were embarrassing failures. So with these 2 failures, he's got a 1-2 record. That's not good in anybody's book. And he starts getting some heat from London. You know, put this thing to bed, General. If you can't do it, we'll find somebody that will. So General Gage decided he needed to go big. He needed a win. And Concord was a tempting target. His spies told him that there were considerable stores in Concord, and the provincial legislature was meeting there illegally. It was an illegal body. The government had been dissolved. And he decided that if he could pick up Adams and Hancock, that would go a long way towards arresting the ringleaders. His plan called for 800 picked troops, best troops that he had in Boston, to be commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Smith. General thought that of all his officers, Lieutenant Colonel Smith was the least likely to start an incident. He wasn't a hothead, he wasn't a glory seeker, he was a thinker, and he followed orders. He was, we might refer to him today as kind of a paper pusher, although they really didn't use that term in 1775. But General Gage had a great deal of confidence in Lieutenant Colonel Smith. So they got his troops out of bed in the middle of the night. They never practiced this. They were with officers that were unfamiliar. They were simply gotten out of bed, issued 36 rounds of ammunition, rode across Back Bay. I can't point to it on this map. They rode across Back Bay and dumped in a swamp, water up to their middles. It took them hours to get out of this swamp. And when they got on the road towards Concord, they hadn't gone very far, and they could hear church bells in the middle of the night. They could see bonfires. They encountered people. Some of them were armed. All of them were heading west. They were heading west towards Concord. Lieutenant Colonel Smith was no dummy. He knew what this meant. The word was out. Word was being spread. They've lost the element of surprise. So he sent back to Boston that he was going to need reinforcements, and he put his fastest troops in the lead, his light infantry. He told them, go to Concord. When they got to this intersection right here, instead of proceeding towards Concord, they turned to the right. We're not sure why, but an officer turned these 5 companies to the right, marched them into town, and initiated this confrontation with the Lexington militia. And we saw how that turned out. While the regulars were firing in Lexington, there had been an observer there from Concord. When firing started, he jumped on his horse and he headed back to Concord. Lieutenant Colonel Smith got his troops on the road, headed towards Concord, considerably behind this guy. They didn't even know he was there. So this observer got into Concord, and he reported to the local militia commander there, Major Buttrick, that the regulars were in Concord and they're firing onto the inhabitants. Major Buttrick asked him, are they firing blank or ball? And he said, well, I'm not sure, but I think ball. So Concord militia had to talk this over a little bit, decide what to do. They finally decided the town is no place to fight. They didn't want the town destroyed, so they pulled out of town to a place called Puckatonset Hill. It's about a mile away. It's their training ground. It's a good defensive position. Other militia that they knew would be coming would know to go there. They got on top of this hill and just waited. So while these guys are on top of this hill, the regulars march into Concord. They spread out. They start searching the town. There's a group of about 3 companies. The British used about 40-man companies. So when I refer to a company, there's about 40 regulars in a company. 3 companies occupied a bridge right down below the militia position called the North Bridge. There's the regulars. That's a big one right there. That's a big dude right there. He's kind of scary looking. Regulars occupied this bridge. There's about 120 of them on this bridge, right down below the militia positions. The rest of them, there's the North Bridge. The rest of them were searching the town. There was another small party, about another 120 men, crossed this bridge, and they went north to search a place called Barrett's Farm. The militia saw them go. They disappeared from sight. These guys on the hill they're just watching what's going on. And what's going on in town is the regulars they were looking for stuff but not finding much. They did find a couple of cannon, and they spiked the cannons. They broke up the carriages and the wheels and threw it in a pile. They found some barrels of flour that they deemed unnecessary for the inhabitants, some wooden plates and crates and boxes, really a bunch of junk. They put it in a pile and set this pile of junk on fire. The fire got away from them, spread to an adjacent building, and the women and children, the only ones left in town, they formed a bucket brigade trying to put this fire out. Some of the regulars helped them. Well, these guys on the hill could see the smoke, and when the steam started coming up, they thought, they thought it was more smoke, and they're thinking the worst. One guy goes up to Major Buttrick and asked the question of the day, which was, are we going to stand around while they burn our town? Major Buttrick says, yeah, I'm kind of worried about this too, but there's 3 companies of regulars on this bridge. We may have to force passage past them. Who's going to lead the charge? At this point, a man named Isaac Davis stepped up. I'll tell you a little bit about Isaac Davis. Isaac Davis was a minute commander from Acton. He was a young guy. He was in his early 30s. He's married, had 4 children. We know a little bit about Isaac Davis because his wife Hannah kept a diary. He was also a gunsmith. He kept his men's muskets in working order. He made cartridge boxes and bayonets for them. These guys were good. They trained at his farm twice a week. They went under arms everywhere they went at this point in time. These guys were as good as anything that the British could field. They were a well-regulated militia. Where we heard that term before. Huh? So Isaac Davis is making this big talk, and I have not a man who's afraid to go. Isaac's men had witnessed a scene at his house earlier that morning that would stay with them for the rest of their lives. When the alarm rider came through in the middle of the night, the Davises were up. The children were sick. They had a condition called canker rash. We know it today as scarlet fever. It's pretty easy to treat, but in 1775, it had a 50% mortality rate. And the only course of action was a cold cloth and prayer. Hannah said that when the alarm rider came through, Isaac never wavered in his preparations. He was getting his battle gear together. They had a list of things they had to take with them: ammunition, some food, a blanket. all these things. His men started arriving. It was their muster point. Some of them just walked in the house. Hannah said that the small feminine space of her kitchen was invaded by the strong masculine presence of men with muskets and bayonets. Isaac's guys used her flour to powder their hair so they could go into battle looking like gentlemen. They made cartridges at her table. When they were all there, final preparations complete, they're in ranks out in front of the house. Isaac's standing in the door. He seemed to want to say something. Hannah said that their eyes met and her heart leapt, and she was overcome with this horrible fear that she'd never see him again in this life. He said simply, "Take good care of the children." He left, took his place at the head of his company. They marched the 6 miles from Acton to Concord, and now he finds himself at the head of this column of militia that's going down this hill to try to force passage across this bridge. The regulars could clearly see him coming. The positions were only 300 or 400 yards apart. They formed into a firing formation. They fired a volley in the water to show that they were loaded with ball and they meant business. Militia just kept on coming. These regulars were a little confused by this. They made fun of these colonial militia, Yankee Doodles and all that. And there's records, letters and things like that from British survivors of the day where they found it remarkable that these militia marched like soldiers. Battalion order, they called it. They were all wearing work clothes, weren't wearing uniforms, but they looked like soldiers coming down the hill towards them. They let them get a little bit closer, and they fired another volley, this time for effect. Isaac Davis and Abner Hosmer were killed on the spot. Isaac Davis was shot squarely through the heart. Major Buttrick was marching right next to him, just covered with Isaac Davis's blood. He gave the order to fire. "Fire, fellow soldiers, for God's sakes, fire as fast as you can." Militia opened up on these regulars on the bridge, and they killed and wounded about a dozen of them. It was a literal decimation. Regulars broke and ran. They ran. These farmers had run them off this bridge, and they didn't really know what to do. Militia's now in possession of this bridge, but they didn't know what to do. Their orders didn't go that far, so they just took up a defensive position overlooking this bridge, and they waited for things to develop. The bunch that was up at Barrett's farm came running back when they heard the firing, expecting to find their comrades on this bridge, and the only ones there were dead. And they were covered by 200 militia with cocked muskets hiding behind a stone wall. These guys went to a position known as trail arms, where they just carried their muskets at their sides. They made themselves look as small and inoffensive as possible, and they simply walked across this bridge. Militia let them go. The switch hadn't been flipped from the peace setting to the war setting. A little bit more about Isaac Davis here. 2 of Isaac Davis's children did die from canker rash. And this image, this iconic image of a Minuteman with one hand on a plow and the other hand holding a musket, was designed by the same sculptor that designed Lincoln's sculpture in Washington and the Lincoln Memorial. He was so moved by the story of Isaac Davis that he found Isaac Davis's descendants and used them as models for this statue. So it's kind of cool to think that if you look at this statue, you're possibly looking at a pretty fair likeness of Isaac Davis. This image is also now the official logo of today's citizen soldiers, the National Guard. By this time in this story, I'm feeling a little bit sorry for Lieutenant Colonel Smith. He's having a terrible, horrible, awful, no good, very bad day. And it's going to get worse. If you look at what the problems Lieutenant Colonel Smith has, he's failed in his mission, failed utterly. They haven't found anything of any military importance. He was chosen for this mission because it was felt that he wouldn't precipitate an incident. There have been 2. One of them could be rightly termed a massacre in Lexington. He's taken casualties. He's 18 miles from home. He's deep in what is now hostile territory. Militia is just swarming into the country in big numbers. He's in danger of being cut off, and they're not going to be nice to him. They are decidedly hostile. He has no choice but to try to get back to Boston in one piece. So he gets his men on the road. This is an artist's rendering of his order of march. He's got the main column on the road. He's got flankers off to the side, and their job was to keep any militia pushed back from the main column. This picture is actually from an archaeological report that was done along Battle Road at a place called Parker's Revenge, which we're going to get to that in a minute. So Smith's got his troops on the march, he's got his flankers out, and they don't go very far until they come to a place called Miriam's Corner. I'd never heard of Miriam's Corner before I got involved with this program. It's one of the most important places in our history and one of the most obscure. There's a small bridge across a drainage ditch. This is obviously a reproduction, but it's small. 800 guys can't just walk across this bridge. So the column comes to a stop. The flankers have to come in to cross this bridge. Everybody's in one place. The guys in the front can just keep on going. The ones in the back have to stand around and wait their turn. And the rear guard can see that they've been followed from Concord. Concord militia has followed them, but what they can't see is there's militia on a hill overlooking this bridge. Militia from Reading and Billerica. So the rear guard is standing there. The Concord militia is getting closer and closer. These guys push out into a firing line and they present. And when they presented to fire, the militia hidden on the hill opened fire. And they piled up regular casualties in the road. This action is important because it was offensive. This was the first offensive action taken during a Revolutionary War against British troops. And with that in mind, it can be pretty safely said that this is where America was born. 12:30 in the afternoon at a place called Miriam's Corner. These guys that took the initiative, took the fight to the British, did it to protect their fellow Americans from being killed that were somewhere up the road. The war lasted for another 8 years after this. So Smith's troops clear this ambush. They go down the road a little ways. There's another ambush, and they soon came to a place where there's another bridge. There's another bridge that has to be crossed. There's a 90-degree turn in the road. The British are going here from left to right. There's a steep hill on the left, and hidden halfway up that hill was Captain Parker and the Lexington militia. I think it says something about Captain Parker that he was able to get these guys from Lexington after they'd taken a pretty bad bloody nose in Lexington. He got them to follow him back into the field. Takes up a good position overlooking the road. He gave strict orders. Captain Parker gave strict orders. Nobody fires until I give the order. He was waiting for the person that he believed was responsible for this massacre at Lexington, and that was Lieutenant Colonel Smith. When Lieutenant Colonel Smith came riding along on his horse and he was right where he wanted, Captain Parker gave the order to fire. They piled up British casualties in the road. Lieutenant Colonel Smith took a ball in the thigh, knocked him off his horse, rendered this brigade of regulars leaderless. The Lexington militia looped back over the hill down to the right and took up another position along the road where they could have another crack at these guys a few minutes later. Smith's troops are in trouble. Unit cohesion is starting to break down. The fear is seeping into the ranks. They're in trouble and they know it. So they're moving up the road faster and faster. They get into another ambush and unit cohesion breaks down entirely. Instead of instead of a column consisting of companies now, it breaks down just into a churning mass of running British troops. It's a rout. It's a thorough rout. They're whipped as bad as it's possible for them to be whipped. They're throwing their muskets down on the ground. They're taking their coats off. Some of them just sit down in the road and wait for the end. It's starting to look like surrender on the Lexington Green is going to be their only option for survival. They're right at the edge of Lexington by now, and they can see a long ways up a hill. And on top of that hill, they can see a long line of red coats up there. After this day, Captain Parker led the Lexington militia into the field two more times. One was at Bunker Hill, and again, he led them into the field in July, and Captain Parker died of tuberculosis in September 1775. I find that he was able to do what he was able to do utterly and completely remarkable while he was dying of tuberculosis. All right. His Lordship Hugh Percy, 2nd Lord of Northumberland, has arrived on the field with 900 troops and 2 cannon. He used his cannons to break up the American formations. Pursuit stopped. Militia pursuit stopped, and Percy let Smith's command into his lines, what was left of them. And he was shocked, utterly and completely shocked. Hugh Percy had an attitude, like a lot of the British officers did, that colonists in general were inferior beings, and militia was really inferior. He had said that militia was only fit to carry tents and cookpots for proper troops. He said in a letter after this day that he had the happiness of saving them from complete destruction. Percy's education was going to commence here pretty shortly. So Percy's now in charge, overall charge. Smith's guys are done. A lot of them don't have weapons. They're freaked out. They're panicked. They're as much of a liability as they are an asset. But he's got to get them back to Boston. They all have to get back to Boston, and they all have to get back to Boston before dark. They don't want to be caught out on this road after dark. He gets his troops on the road. Where are we? There's Miriam's Corner. We're right here at Lexington, right here. He's immediately attacked. Gets moving. He's immediately attacked. He's attacked over and over and over. Now, our mythology, if you want to call it that, and things we learned in 6th grade history class or whenever it was, we've got this image of these yeoman farmers that are hiding behind trees and they're sniping at the British as they marched past. And that's not how this went down. These fights were unit actions. They were controlled by officers. They were trained militia that participated in this. It was more open order skirmishing. Militia would take up a position next to the road. They'd fire a volley or two. They'd pull back to a rally point. They'd go back out in front of them. It's just what Captain Parker did down there at Parker's Revenge. It was a tactic devised by General William Heath. He called it a moving circle of fire. And interestingly, Percy called it the same thing, a moving circle of fire, even though the two men never met. Percy said in a letter back to his father that they surrounded us with a moving circle of fire. So this column is under fire continuously from Lexington all the way back to Cambridge. Fighting in Menotomy was particularly nasty. Menotomy is now known as Arlington. It's particularly nasty in Menotomy. There's houses up close to the road. If the British would take fire from a house, they would assault the house, kill everyone in it, and burn the house. There's one house that's still standing in Arlington. It's called the Jason Russell House. They didn't burn that one, but after the battle, they found 11 bodies in that house. They said the blood was so deep it ran over people's shoes, and there were 11 more in the orchard out back. The British are they're breaking down. Cohesion is breaking down here. A lot of them are drunk. They've stolen booze from roadside taverns. Somebody even stole the communion silver out of a church, and it's starting to look bad for Percy. He's trying to get back, but he can't. He gets to this river, to this bridge, right here. American troops had destroyed the bridge across the river, and Percy's trapped. He's outnumbered by now. There's about 4,000 militia in the field. He's trapped up against this bridge, and it's starting to look bad. And a local Tory showed him a road that he didn't know about, and they slipped up that road, and instead of Boston, they ended up on the Charlestown Peninsula, where they dug in on Bunker Hill. There was a British warship nearby, the HMS Somerset, to cover them a little bit. General Heath halted pursuit. It's about dark now. Heath halted pursuit. He just let them get on Bunker Hill, let them do whatever they want to do. Heath didn't want a massacre, and a massacre would have been exactly what would have happened. The militia would have killed every last one of them. There was a feeling amongst all the leaders at the time that they wanted the moral high ground. There was maybe a little expectation that they could reconcile with the central government. Heath didn't want a massacre. He didn't want his troops subjected to a naval bombardment, so they stopped. It took the regulars the rest of the night to get across that little channel between Charlestown and Boston. And in the morning, when General Gage was reading his mail and drinking his tea and eating his crumpets, he was no longer the governor of Massachusetts. He was besieged. There were 14,000 militia had mustered overnight, and every single one of them was on the hills overlooking Boston. The siege of Boston had commenced, and it lasted 11 months. General Gage tried to break out of the siege in June. He got a few reinforcements, so he was feeling pretty good about himself. The Battle of Bunker Hill ensued. The British took the hill, but lost another 1,000 troops doing it. It was said that many more such victories as this and we'll be totally ruined. General Gage was fired and sent back to England and replaced with General Howe. So this was the first day of the war. It lasted 8 years, concluding in 1783 with the Treaty of Paris. It set the stage for the Declaration of Independence. Lisa and I went to Kansas City last week and saw an original copy of the Declaration of Independence, by the way. So I want to talk about, since this is what was that word we had that we were, the 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. This is a copy. There are 56 colonial delegates signed this seditious document. They knew they were committing treason, and it was said in the room where they were signing, it was like being at a funeral. There wasn't any laughing, joking around. This was serious business, and the British hunted them without mercy. Some of them impoverished themselves by giving money to the cause. Some of them had their families taken hostage. 12 of them had their homes burned and their possessions plundered. 5 of them were captured and killed by the British. 9 died while serving with the army. This copy of the Declaration of Independence was the first one. It was the second copy, actually the third copy made. It's the first one that had the names of, I would say, all the signers. There's one missing. This was printed in January 1777. One guy didn't sign it until sometime after that. There's 2 names, John Hancock, who was the president of Congress at the time, and Charles Thomson, who was the congressional secretary. The rest of these guys signed sometime after that. I want to call your attention to this right here. I don't know if you could see it. This document was authorized by Congress, and it was printed by a woman named Mary Catherine Goddard. She was in the newspaper business. Kind of remarkable, a woman running a business on her own in 1775. What's more remarkable about this is she normally signed her work M.K. Goddard. She put her full name on this one. It's like she wanted to be a part of this, and maybe she knew something big was going on. She was also the postmaster of Baltimore for 14 years, and she was forced out by I'll call it a political rival who thought that the job was more than a woman could handle. And she'd been doing it already for 14 years. I'm going to wrap this up. Oh, I left part of this out. Two of the signers became presidents, John Adams and Thomas Jefferson. They served together. They took a chance signing the Declaration of Independence together. They died on the same day, 4th of July in 1826. So this is not only the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, it's 200th anniversary of these two guys' death. So this quote over here on the left, I always like this. Posterity, you'll never know how much it costs the present generation to preserve your freedom. I hope you'll make good use of it. If you do not, I shall repent in heaven that I ever took half the pains to preserve it. The fire burns. Fire still burns, and it's up to us to preserve it. Thank you for coming. I hope you enjoyed this presentation. I'm open for questions if anybody has any. Answer may be, I don't know. No one? Pardon?
Trick question for you. Who's the only signer of the Declaration of Independence buried in Washington, D.C.?
I don't know. Who is it?
Eldridge Gerry.
Eldridge Gerry, from which we get the term
Gerrymandering.
gerrymandering. One of these guys, I found Button Gwinnett, he was a delegate from Georgia, was killed in a duel. He made the mistake of challenging a political rival who was really good with a pistol, and came out on the losing side of that. Are you sure about that? That Eldridge Gerry's the only one? Okay, I'll take your word for it. I'm gonna mind if I use that?
Go right ahead.
Okay.
So you said all-wheel drive, you rode 3 times all year? You rode 3 times?
4 times actually. He made 3 trips setting up this communication system, and then again he rode on April 19th.
So on April 9th, how long did it take you for that entire ride? How far was it? How many miles?
Well, it's about 12 miles, and it took him a couple hours to cover that 12 miles. And I had to leave a lot out of this because I didn't think you guys would want the 2-hour version. So when Revere left Boston shortly after dark, and he was provided with a horse. And if you can, you know, I've read Paul Revere's memoirs, and he talks about how much fun it was to ride this horse. It was almost like he was out on a pleasure ride. And he had to take a route getting to Lexington that he hadn't originally planned on because he ran into a British patrol, and he had to dodge them and take the long way around on this horse, Brown Beauty. And he was captured later on that night. After he warned Adams and Hancock, he headed towards Concord and encountered another British patrol, and they caught him that time. He managed to get away. I encourage everybody to do a couple of things. It's one thing I left out. It wasn't in here. We encourage everybody to read our founding documents, and there's only 3. Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, and the Federalist Papers, which there's 87 of those, but we can count that as 3. One of our sources for this is a book called Paul Revere's Ride. It's written by David Hackett Fisher. Fisher is a historian, and this book is the definitive work on Paul Revere, and Fisher recounts Revere going through the countryside and setting all this up. So, here we go. Anybody else?
Can you tell us a little bit about Project Appleseed?
Project Appleseed. This is off the back of my business card, and that really sums it up. We do this. This is really what we do. But a lot of times when we do this, we are teaching. We also teach a marksmanship course, a rifle marksmanship course. Most of our courses are at 25 meters. There's a few people in here that have been through the course. We tell this story at every 25-meter event. We break it up into 3 pieces, and we tell it during breaks. And we tell some others too about some other personalities that were there. Our instructors are very good at teaching marksmanship, but the marksmanship part is just a way to have a little bit of fun, get some like-minded people together in one place, and we tell this story. And interestingly, our marketing people contact everybody that goes to these events, and there's about 20% of the respondents say that participation in one of our programs has been life-changing for them. I mean, there's a lot of people that just don't know this, just don't know what happened. And it's just like, we don't want this place to be forgotten, and we don't want the people that made what we have possible to be forgotten. Did everybody see that list of names that was up when you first came in? That was colonists, Americans, if you will, that were killed by the British on April 19th. And we don't want them to be forgotten either. The youngest one's 14 years old. He didn't do anything but look out a window. British shot him.
Years ago, I took a tour in Boston. We were on a bus tour. And something always stuck in my head. I really never thought about this. I didn't know about it. But at one time, back when the British had a lot of occupation there in Boston, they got to the point where the Army would have the citizens of Boston house the British soldiers.
Oh yeah.
And you can see how that would really get on your nerves. You've got these total strangers now that are in your home. They're sleeping there. I imagine they were eating there too, eating the food or whatever, the household. And then you can imagine too, if the guy's got young daughters or something, you can see how that would get on your nerves.
The British troops were not very well behaved in Boston. And Boston at the time only had about 6,000 inhabitants. So you add another 4,000 to that mix. It's a problem. It's one of the It's one of the indictments in the Declaration of Independence. He has quartered troops among us. Yeah, that's a good point. Did you tour Battle Road while you were there?
No, no. We did go to Concord, where the bridge is and all.
Mm-hmm. So you saw part of it.
Yeah. And not far from there, we went over to Thoreau's place as well.
I haven't been able to go to Battle Road, but we're trying, aren't we? We're gonna make it happen, probably next year. Anybody else?
Isn't that business about quartering troops one of the things that's in the first 10 amendments to the Constitution?
In the Bill of Rights? You got me just a little bit stumped, and maybe it is in the Declaration of Independence. I don't know. I'll look that up though. I'll see you in the museum one of these days. We'll talk about that then. I don't know. That's a good point. More homework. More homework. Everybody needs to read the Declaration of Independence, and let's just see. I mean, the Constitution. You know, I'm going to go with probably one of the amendments touches on that. If it's not, there'll be something in the Federalist Papers about that. There's no doubt in my mind about that.
It seemed like the militia were more disciplined or professionally trained in all those skirmishes, and yet the British weren't they highly disciplined and trained? Yeah,
the militia did real good this day. Probably better this day than they did the rest of the war. They were ready for this. They were motivated. They had them outnumbered big time. And yeah, you know, I agree with what you're saying. And there's possibility the British underestimated their opponents a little bit. I mean, they really went out on a limb having them march 18 miles one way with no food. Who does that? Oh yeah, I agree with that.
Were the British surprised by the tactics of the militia?
Yes. Yes. They both use the same manual of arms because everybody in this was British up until noon on April 19th. But and that's one of the tenets of Appleseed is marksmanship. We tie into that. The difference between the manual of arms that the militia used and as opposed to the British is the British didn't aim. Their commands were present and fire, and there was an aim command in the militia, and they had a nasty tendency to hide behind rocks and trees, very unsportsmanlike. And they shot at officers. And the officers wore they were brighter red coats, so it was easy to tell shoot me first coats, we would call them. But yeah, there was another difference in the tactics too. Most of the militia didn't have bayonets. The Acton Minute Company had bayonets, but the bayonet was the tool, that was the fighting tool. And you know, the militia didn't do well in the war after that, and it was partly because they couldn't stand up to a bayonet charge. Everybody seen the movie The Patriot? I'm sure so in the final climactic scene, that's the Battle of Cowpens. And Daniel Morgan took advantage of this British knowledge that the militia couldn't stand up to a bayonet charge. So he put his militia out in front, told them to fire 2 shots and run. It was just what the British were expecting. And they chased them down, and it was a total disaster for the British. So yeah, they did have different tactics. You guys are great questions here tonight. I only had one, I don't know, and it had to come from you. That was.
Look it up.
I'll take your word for it.
Go ahead.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Anybody else? All right. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks again to our sponsor, Stan Winkler.
You're not what? Oh, come on. I could really use one.